years ago, I don't know how many years ago, they asked me if I would do the module on the legislative process and long-term care advocacy. Because in my role as executive director of Leading Age Oklahoma, I'm a lobbyist, and that's what I do. I work to get nursing homes funded. I work to make sure that there's not laws passed that will hurt long-term care. I work to pass laws that will help long-term care. So you're saying, well, if we have you out there to do that, why do we need to know about it? And that comes down to the word advocacy. I always say you're part of the solution or you're part of the problem. If you gripe about something and said, this is terrible, but do nothing about it, you own that problem. You're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. If you don't like what's going on in today's world, you can say something about it and do something about it. But if you don't do anything about it, you'll own it. Good or bad. I mean, I won't get into politics on that, but whichever way you are, you know, you need to, if you want to be the change you want to see in the world, you're either going to sit back and you can be proactive, or you're just going to be reactive and own it. But with long-term care advocacy, in the last session, we talked about the public's perception of long-term care and how it's not always a positive public perception. The other word that was so important that we covered was the word trust. So when we went to the legislators this last year, and I said, not this year, but last year when we got the Medicaid rate increase, I went to them and I said, you know what? We need to ask for this big amount of money to do big things to change long-term care. And the reason we were successful is because of trust. We did, and I said, we can't just go and ask for the money. If we go and ask for the money, they'll say, get in line. Everybody has to ask. Everybody needs more money. Roads and bridges, education, corrections, everybody needs more money. But the difference with ours was we had strings attached to it. We said, if you give us this money, this is what we'll do. Because if we just wanted the money with no strings attached, the chances of us getting that money were slim to none. But we put strings attached in. We added some staffing to it, increased the staffing ratios. We added more long-term care ombudsmen so complaint issues could get resolved. We increased the personal needs allowance for the people that got $50, now they get $75. And in doing so, these legislators trusted me. They said, you know what, you're asking for the money, but there's strings attached. And I said, and if we don't do that, just like this pay for performance program, here's the deal. This is what it is. If they improve this measure by this much, you get this amount of money. If you don't, you get none. So they said, you know what, we trust you, and we got that funded. So trust is huge in this. But the other thing is, if you're working in long-term care, you can either be a part of the solution or you're part of the problem. So I send out advocacy alerts. As a lobbyist, I go to the Capitol, I find out what the problems are, and I send an advocacy alert. Because when I go to the Capitol, I'm one person. But if I have 150 facilities, if I send an email to them and say, I need you and 2 or 3 of your best friends or best people on your management team to do the same thing, instead of one person advocating for this, we have 450 people. We multiply our voice. And that's what being an advocate is about. If you care about the long-term care profession, which you do because you're in this class, then you need to be an advocate. If someone says, gosh, they want to change this and that's bad, then if you don't call your legislator and say, hey, this is bad, tell them why as a part of the long-term care profession, then you're going to own that problem. If that passes and you didn't do anything about it, so you can either be proactive or reactive. So that's why we have this conversation about the legislative process and advocacy. So we're going to run through a lot of stuff. I teach a part of a leadership academy, and one of the things we do is I took long-term care leaders to the Capitol, and I told them, I said, the last time you were probably in this building was 5th grade, when you took a field trip as a 5th grader to visit the Capitol. And you know what? Every one of them, every time said, yep, that's the last time I was up here. I don't want to put anyone on the spot. There's no wrong answer. Have any of you been in the Capitol in the past 5 years? You have? a few, maybe one. But don't feel bad. Before I had this job, I didn't go to the Capitol. I didn't call my legislator. To be honest, I couldn't have even told you who my legislator was. And if you don't know your legislator, I won't put you on the spot. But there's a site that you could go to. It says, find my legislator. And you need to know, I give all of our members the name of your senator, your representative, your congressman in Washington, D.C., your U.S. senator. Because when I send out these things, I thought, you know what? I'm not going to be the only one calling. I want everyone to call. I want 150 people calling. And then if you phone a friend, they'll call too. And that's how change happens. When I passed that bill back in 2004, and keep in mind, I'm not saying that, I don't brag. I never mean to brag. I didn't pass that bill. I had an idea, and a lot of people understood how that idea could be good, and we all passed that bill. We all did. There was not one person who voted against it in the House or Senate. Oh, there were people that were against it. They were skeptical. They weren't sure if that was the right way, but none of the legislators voted against it. And afterwards, I asked him, I said, why, I know people contacted you and said, hey, vote against this. This might not be good, but you didn't. Why didn't you? And you know what they said? We couldn't vote against something that made so much sense, something that sounded so good for the profession. So I go back to, we can either be a part of the solution or you're part of the problem. So we need to use our voices. This is an election year, and it's very important. So in Oklahoma, we have our Oklahoma legislature has a House of Representatives that has 101 members. They serve 2-year elected terms, and Republicans have controlled the House since 2004. And the current breakdown is 76 Republicans and 25 Democrats. And the Speaker of the House is Charles McCall from Atoka. Anyone near Atoka? Yeah. Anyway, so what's important about that? If you want to pass a revenue producing measure, you have to pass by a 2/3 majority, a 3/4 majority, and Republicans have the 3/4 majority. So you're thinking, we have a Republican controlled House, a Republican controlled Senate, and we have a Republican governor, and they have 3/4 majority votes. Republicans can get anything done what they wanted to do. Do you know less has gotten done since they had the full sweep than we had before? Why? It's because and nothing against Republicans and Democrats. And I'll tell you, I'm not a Democrat or Republican. So whatever I say, you're not going to know, because I don't want to lose 2/3 of you or half of you saying, I'm not going to listen to her. She's that other party. The Republican Party, Democrat, you're going to have extreme Democrats, you're going to have moderate Democrats, extreme Republicans, moderate Republicans. So we have a clean sweep in Oklahoma, and we have had huge challenges trying to get anything done. So that's why we need your voice as an advocate. And then the other side of our legislative process is the Senate, and the Senate has 48 members. There's a 4-year staggered elected terms, 4 years. Republicans gained control of the Senate in 2008, and the current breakdown is 39 Republicans and 9 Democrats. They're presided over by the Senate Pro Tem, Greg Treat, and the Lieutenant Governor, Matt Pinnell, is the president of the Senate. This is interesting how things have changed over the years. So the elections. Well, the most recent election was November 5th, 2019. This is probably one of the most interesting statistics of this presentation. With the most recent election, only 10 members of the 101 members of the House of Representatives have served 7 or more years. And 50% of the Senate members have served 2 years or less. So why are you saying this is wondering about this? I don't know, I can't remember the exact year, but Oklahoma passed term limits years ago. Do you remember that? We had people serving in the legislature for 30 and 40 years, and Oklahoma passed, by vote of the people, term limits. You could only serve 12 years in the legislature. And some people are saying, well, that's a really good thing. We don't want those people sitting up there, career politicians. So I'm going to tell you both sides to it. There was a man that was in the legislature for 30 some odd years, and it was his way or the highway. He wasn't open to listening to anyone's suggestions, opinions, or anything. And I was just like, you're keeping a chair warm up here. On the flip side, now we have so many new people. And keep in mind, new people, new blood, new ideas, it's good. These legislators don't know the difference. And if you ran today, I don't know all about transportation, corrections, DHS, healthcare authority. There's a lot to learn about state government when you become a legislator. So these new legislators don't know the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, or what's funded from DHS and healthcare authority, or what percent of people in the state are on Medicaid, or how much of our budget goes to education or corrections or anything. It's a very tangled web. So I am really not going to ask this class, how many of you think term limits are a good thing and how many of you think it's a bad thing? I can see good and bad on both sides, but I think the public really needs to understand this, because I think 99% of the public has no idea. They're saying nothing gets done. Well, state representative is elected to a 2-year term. The first 2 years, they're learning the process, how a bill is signed into law, much less learning all the intricacies of every department and whether legislation is good or bad. So why does someone want to be a legislator? It's because they make the big bucks. In November of 19, the salary was for a full year, $35,021. Then they raised the base to $38,400. The president pro tem gets an additional $16,354, and keep in mind, he basically works year round. And other top leadership gets $11,276. They do get a travel stipend and per diem, like to cover food and meals. I want to say we've had some races for state representative that makes $38,000, where people have spent $500,000, $600,000, and $800,000 to be elected to do that job. The office of the governor, I believe, makes $300,000 and some odd $1,000, and they've spent $5-6 million to get elected to that job. So terms of office, there's a prohibition on holding multiple offices. There is a 12-year term limit. Because of our term limits we voted in, the years in legislative office do not need to be consecutive. We've had legislators. There is a legislator that served 1 2-year term, and he was one and done. He said, there isn't enough money to get me to do this again, and he left. He was gone for 4 years, and he just got elected. He decided to run again, so he's coming back for seconds. The years in both the Senate and the House of Representatives are added together and included to determine the total number of legislative years in office. So you can, quite a few people start out in the House of Representatives, and then when their district Senate position is open, they run for Senate, because the Senate is perceived as the stronger body. In the event of a vacancy in the legislature, the governor calls a special session. The reason I'm going to tell you about all this, you have to know a little bit about the process so you can be an effective advocate. So just stick with me. I'm not, and who knows, there could be someone in this class that might say, you know what, I'm going to run for office myself. The regular legislative session, it begins at noon on the first Monday of February and must adjourn no later than 5 p.m. on the last Friday of May. However, in odd-numbered years, following an election, the legislature meets on the Tuesday after the first Monday of January for the sole purpose of determining the outcome of the statewide elections. The 2020 session was designated as the second session of the 57th legislature. Every session is 2 years. So the first year they introduce bills, and those bills If they're not heard, they can be, if they were heard in committee but didn't die, they can be carried over to the next session. At the end of the second session, the bills die and go away, and then the next year we start a new session. So every session is 2 years. A special session. Oh, let me go back. Now that we have a definite time frame for the session, I will tell you, we used to not have that. And some states don't. The legislative session would go on and on and on until people came to an agreement. You know how hard that is sometimes. No agreement, no agreement. Well, it drug on and on. It went past May to June to July. So finally, they set some parameters. But I will tell you, the last month of the session, there were nights I was at that Capitol in a committee meeting room at 1:30 a.m. They just keep going. I don't know how late, the latest it's been, 2 o'clock in the morning, 2:30 sometimes, and they start up the next day. Some of this stuff just, you know, they can't get it figured out to the last minute, and they finally see who will give in and how they can come to an agreement. So there's also can be special sessions. A few years ago, we had a special session because they never could come to an agreement. So they adjourned the regular session and immediately opened up a special session. Special sessions can be convened as follows: issued by 2/3 of the members of the Senate or 2/3 of the members of the House, or by a call of the governor. Most often it's by a call of the governor. So where do bills come from? Did that advance again? This thing is going. This thing's going crazy. Either that or I'm crazy. You know what? We never went through that. Hold on. He's not going to want this recording.
It'll be fine.
I got a little. If they're not say anything about him, they'll chime in. So where do bills come from? They're a request of a government agency or local government. So the health department, survey process, right now assisted living, the scope and severity grid, we got that put into legislation. So sometimes an agency says we need to make a change in order to advance what needs to be done. The request of an interest group, the Humane Society introduced a bill about something about wild horses or something like that, a special interest group. The request of a constituent. So every one of you in here are a constituent. You live in a legislative district, you have a state representative, and you have a state senator. And if you said, I do not like the speed limit being this speed on these state roads in all these, in front of my house and all these other places, you could go to your state representative and say, I want you to introduce a bill on my behalf as a constituent to change the speed limit, or to change the state flower or the state fruit or the state, all those fluffy things. But in addition to those, there's lots of bills. I mean, some of these bills are 2 pages or 200 pages that really make huge changes, just like the reimbursement we did for nursing homes when we did that. 2 years ago when we added the extra Medicaid funds, I'm trying to think how long that bill was, 20 some odd pages, because we put all that in there and outlined all that. So national model legislation, AARP did that before. They came together and said, we want this legislation in every state. So they got a legislator in every state to endorse national legislation. And then the governor could say, I want the state fruit to be the watermelon. And that's happened before. I think it's the watermelon. And then they'll introduce a bill that will give us a state fruit, or the legislator's own interest. The legislator might say, there was a legislator that was really passionate about drunk driving and introduced a bill that had to do with DUIs. And then there's also interim studies. So the legislative session goes from February to the end of May. But then there's legislators that are saying, my constituent wants me to introduce a bill. I don't know if it's good, bad, or ugly. So I'm going to do an interim study. And there are some interim studies underway right now. I'll be involved in 2 of them week after next. One is on the Alzheimer's disclosure form, 613, and the other is about COVID support for long-term care. And so if you have ideas about that, share it with me, because that's the whole purpose of an interim study, is to get key people together and discuss what needs to be done to introduce a bill. Sometimes they'll just say, you know, really nothing needs to be done, let it go. Or they'll say, this is worse than we thought. And then they'll draft the parameters for the bill and then file the bill. So preparation. All bills must be requested and introduced by a legislator. A constituent cannot do that. You have to ask a legislator. The deadline to request a bill last year was December 13th. The deadline to introduce the bill was January 16th. So you can request a bill and then legislators think about it, because they get more requests than bills that they're allowed to handle. So then they look at all of them and decide which ones they're actually going to introduce. So the volume of legislation, this is really interesting. And you're like, none of this is interesting. But I want to make this public policy interesting for you, because the goal of this would be is, you know what, I'd love, personal goal, by the time you get your administrator's license, that you have figured out who your state representative is, your state senator, and have the chance to call them on one thing. Call them on something. We're going to be doing interim studies. I'll give you a sneak peek. The interim study, I think we should have a life engagement coordinator at every nursing home. And the state would fund this position because of COVID-19, and this person's going to be the one to help schedule all the family visits, outdoor visits, the communications with the iPads, if you got one of those grants, FaceTime, all this stuff, and notification of the families. So do you think that's a good idea? So if I get that bill taken care of, I'm going to let you all know, and then the bill would be filed before the end of your class, probably, or I'll know. I can tell Z, then you can call the legislator and say, I think that's a great idea for a bill. And then if that bill's passed into law next session, between February and May, you can say, you know what, I helped pass that law. I helped make sure that we had that position for facilities. So you can make a difference. So legislators may introduce an unlimited number of bills, with the exception of non-leadership House members. They only get 8 bills. So if you go to your state representative, they're going to say, you know what, I have 25 constituents or my own personal list of bills that need to be introduced. I can only pick 8 of those. And then they're going to pick the ones that are most important. So that's why if one of these bills is in the House and that state legislator is saying, I can only pick 8 bills, we could call that state legislator and say, fund that position. It's critical. Think what you could do in a nursing home with it. 1 full FTE just to be a scheduler. Wouldn't that be wonderful? To take the iPad around and do FaceTime with people instead of expecting the social services or activity person to do it. Let them do their other job. So for 2020, legislators considered new bills, 840 bills in the Senate and 1,361 bills filed in the House. Do you know what that means? That's about 2,100 bills. We have to do searches on words for activities, long-term care, resident, ombudsman, survey, and we have to find all the bills that have to do with long-term care. Last year at the beginning of the session, I tracked 400 bills that had a keyword. Then I brought that down. I read all of those bills. Then I brought it down to about 110. And of those 110, I found 50 that really are like, okay, these are critical for long-term care. And those are the 50 bills we watched in addition to the others. Because you know what happens? Someone files a bill, they introduce it, and it goes to a committee meeting. And in that committee meeting, they say, you know what, we want to change this bill. So then they change it. So what was a very good bill, if you said, House Bill 1202, vote yes for that. It's for our life engagement person. They might put in that bill, well, if you get this life engagement person, you have to pay back the money, and then you have to keep that position for 4 more years. and you're thinking, whoa, wait a second. I don't want that bill. I can't pay the money back, and I sure can't afford the position for 4 years. So on any given moment, on any given day, a bill goes from good to bad, back to good, back to bad. And that's what lobbyists do. So I'm a lobbyist, and you'll hear good things about lobbyists and bad things about lobbyists. You'll say that people will say lobbyists just try to advance their agenda. They try to sidestep the legislative process and just, they work with key people and just get stuff done. But I would like to think that there's a lot of lobbyists out there like me that read these bills every day. We know when there's a change in it. We track it, we monitor it, review it. And then I've done this before. I'll send out a thing saying, House Bill 1202 is a good bill. Call your legislator. 3 days later, call your legislator. This bill is a bad bill now. It's changed from good to bad. Tell them it's a no. And then you know what they do? They change that bill and they move it back. And then they're saying, well, now it's a good bill. So that's why you need to learn to be an advocate. You could call and say, I want this bill, but only if it funds it. If it funds this position, no strings attached, we want it. So that's why you need to learn to be an advocate. All you have to do is learn one sentence, the one sentence that describes that bill, and then if it's good or bad. So it's easy. It really is easy. So of those almost 2,100 bills, because of COVID-19, I think 51 became law. So we reviewed all these bills and all this stuff happened. Some of those bills were very important. There were 2 that I just thought, please, we need to get this bill through. Well, the legislators didn't want to go to the Capitol. When everything was going on with COVID, they pushed through 50 bills. A few bills that were general in nature. Most all of those bills had to do with the budget or regulatory changes that had to be done. So all those other bills, all the other work got shoved aside. So next session is the first session of the 58th legislature. All those bills go away from last time. So of these 2,100 bills, a lot of them are going to be bills that are going to be recycled, come back. We'll have to see what we can do with them. So in 2019, to put it in perspective, there were 1,040 new bills that were filed in the Senate, 1,733 filed in the House. And so that's 2,700 bills. 550 became law. So the path of a bill, here's what happens. And actually there's a spreadsheet. I used to share this and I don't anymore because you could never follow the path. Because bills take interesting twists and turns and they get thrown out of a committee and brought up in conference committee and brought back and changed. In the House, you go to your state representative. I want to introduce a bill. That bill, its house of origin is the House. And in a perfect world, it goes to a committee. It gets passed out of the committee, gets passed out of the House. Goes to the opposite house, which is the Senate. Gets passed out of the Senate committee, gets passed out of the Senate, General Senate, and then it goes to the governor. So technically, it has 4 stops. House committee, House, Senate committee, Senate, onto the governor. 5 stops. I know bills that have been through probably 25 steps. That's how convoluted it gets because people can change bills. And sometimes that is good when we make changes. So one of the most important things that goes on at the Capitol each year is they develop the budget. And most of you probably don't know much about that budget. How many of you have heard it? We're spending too much money. We need to cut taxes and quit spending money. Every year that budget keeps getting bigger and bigger. On the flip side, some of you might say, oh my gosh, they have cut so many state agencies. They've cut so many services and stuff. They cannot cut that budget or it's going to cripple the state. So we see both sides. Some sides that are saying government's too big, cut. The other sides, oh my gosh, we've cut so much that we're compromised. So let's learn a little bit about where we really are. So the legislature appropriates money for the fiscal year, July 1st through June 30th. Under State Question 640 that we passed into law, any tax increases must have a 3/4 vote of the legislature. And right now, that is really an unsurmountable hurdle because 3/4 of the people at that Capitol never agreed on anything. So that's why we've had some problems with budget cuts because no one could agree on any new revenue. So the appropriation totals are based on the projected revenue as certified by the Equalization Board in December. So the Equalization Board in December says, this is how much money we have to spend. And then they project the upcoming revenue for the rest of the year. During the legislative session from February to May, they develop a budget, then the budget goes into effect in July. The three main sources of government operations and programs: personal income tax, 37%. It used to be 32%. Sales tax, 36%, and the gross production tax is 6%. So sometimes you hear people in Texas doesn't have a sales tax. They pay less taxes than we do. Well, Oklahoma is really a balanced state because we get our taxes from three sources. These sources I've listed here. So we have property taxes, personal income tax, and sales tax. So our state is really balanced. Some states that don't have any, oh, you don't pay any state income tax. Their property taxes are 3, 4, or 5 times higher. So the property owners are paying all the tax. So I believe Oklahoma has a good tax program because it's balanced. If you have very little property taxes and have real high sales tax, then elderly, young couples, low income families, they're paying a disproportionate amount of the taxes because it's a use tax, sales tax. Everybody pays their tax on groceries and buys gas, things like that. So when you look at a state and they say something to the effect of, we don't have property tax, we don't have sales tax, or we have high property tax, it all comes out in the end. It's just different buckets that make up the budget. But most people don't know that. They think, well, Texas doesn't pay a sales tax. I think it's Texas that doesn't have sales tax. Texas, hey, I'm going to move to Texas. Check out Texas's property taxes. So much more than ours. So you have to understand the big picture with taxes. So speaking of big picture, now I'm going to tell you where this money goes. So then they have to appropriate the revenue. So there's this general revenue fund. And that's where the appropriations go, the general revenue fund. But there are also major funds that have restricted purposes. There's money that's skimmed out off the top because it's already earmarked for certain big projects. The legislature cannot appropriate more than 95% of the certified funds for the upcoming year. They hold back 5% just as a buffer. Well, I'm telling you right now, and this will all be in perspective when I tell you about the budget, we're probably looking at $1 billion budget shortfall of a total budget of $7 billion. So you better buckle up because this next year is going to be an interesting one. During the fiscal year, if general revenue falls below 95% of the certified projection, budget shortfall is declared and across-the-board cuts proportional become necessary. Some funds are not certified and the legislature can appropriate 100% of the projected revenue. Like some of the earmarked funds on the front end that are outside of the general revenue fund can be certified, and 100% of those funds, that revenue can be allocated. So you've probably heard of the rainy day fund. The rainy day funds has been as high as $1 billion. It's been as low as $2. I think it got down to $2 at one time. So here's what happens. General revenue collections exceeding 100% of certification are deposited in the Constitutional Reserve Fund, known as the Rainy Day Fund. It was created in 1985. Money in the rainy day fund can be spent as follows: up to 3/8 for a shortfall in a current year, up to an additional 3/8 for the upcoming year, if it's below general revenue collections for the current fiscal year, and an additional 1/4 upon declaration of an emergency. So the reason they put protections in there is there have been years ago when there was a budget surplus. And before we had the rainy day fund, the legislature said it's more money for us to allocate. I remember the good old days when we were looking for ways to spend money. Oh, let's start up this program. We could fund this, we could do that. Well, now the good thing is they're peeling off some of that money, putting it in the rainy day fund. If we have excess funds, and then limiting how much of that money can actually be allocated. And then keep in mind, in a year with a revenue shortfall, we can't go in and just sweep it all out. It has to be taken out proportion to if it's the current year, the next year, or if it's a declaration of emergency. So there are some safeguards in there now. And there was money taken out this past year. The state budget. State agencies combine funding streams and sources. 3 main funding sources that pay for government operations and programs: state appropriated funds, federal funds, and revolving funds. Revolving funds come from fees, millage, and co-pays. Now I'll give you a hint. Since we did this no new taxes, and it takes 3/4 of the vote to approve any new tax increases, they're not increasing taxes. They're increasing fees. If you think about it, fees for everything have gone up. Fees for license, fees for, driver's license, car tags, all kinds of fees. I'm a lobbyist. I used to not have to pay anything. I have to pay $200 now. I have a fee to be a lobbyist. Lots of fees have been imposed since I can't raise taxes. So here's really an interesting part, the state budget. If you listen to people on the street, the budget's gotten too big, the budget's not big enough to cover expenses. In fiscal year 09, the total budget was $7.125 billion. For fiscal year 21, it started July 1st of this year, because we're in fiscal year 21. The total budget was $7.715 billion. That's 11 years later. In inflation-adjusted dollars, the fiscal year 21 budget is $1.833 billion, or 19% below the fiscal year 10 budget. So think about that. The next time someone tells you we're blowing too much money, the budget's too big, we are 19% below spending power where we were in fiscal year 10. DHS's caseload has gone up by 25%, and their staff has been reduced by 30%. So the caseload's gone up, staff's gone down. So when people say we're spending too much and we're not good stewards of our state dollars, we are. But I'll tell you still, there's probably some areas that they're still spending some money that probably need to be looked at. But there's also some other areas that we probably need to look at to say, is this going to compromise us in the long run? And that's where you all come in to be an advocate. You could say, well, I didn't know that. You're trying to get someone approved for Medicaid through the county DHS office. Delay, 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 delay. Well, that's because they don't have as many people working in there. Their caseload has gone up. So you know what? What happens to these people? They can't be in a nursing home, or the nursing home will take them. They can't, they couldn't go to Advantage Assisted Living, Medicaid Assisted Living. They cannot go there because until they're approved, there's no retroactive payment there. So what happens? That person can wait 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, more than 3 days. But while they're waiting in those 3 or 4 weeks, they could have been in the assisted living getting what they need. They might be in the emergency room 3 times and run up a $100,000 bill. So sometimes I think it might be smart to have case managers that get this stuff done sooner. That's why we're all looking at this, working together to figure out ways to improve our processes. So the appropriations to the largest state agencies. First of all, the fastest growing population in the state of Oklahoma is 65 plus. It's always historically been infant to 18 years of age, and now it's 65 plus. Common education gets 39% of the entire state budget. Higher education gets 10%. That's half of our state budget goes to education, half. The reason I say this is because people are saying they spend too much money on long-term care. Well, we're spending all this money on Medicaid. The Healthcare Authority gets 13%. Right now in Oklahoma, we have 3.9 million people. We have over 800,000 people that qualify for Medicaid. And someone said, well, we need to cut that. Well, the only way to cut that is if we raise salaries, because these people qualify for Medicaid because they're making such little money. So that might help is if we could raise wages a little bit, because that's what's going to get people off Medicaid. But how many of you realized that 800,000, 1/5 of our population in Oklahoma is on Medicaid? 1/5. That's a lot. Corrections, 7% of our entire budget. That's high. So advocacy, here we are, long-term care. You've gotten all that you needed to know about that other stuff. Why is it important? The budget. You know what? If you sat back in your office and ran your nursing home, you're going to get a letter from the Healthcare Authority at some point to say, congratulate. No, I wouldn't say congratulations. I'd like for it to say congratulations, but it'll say you're going to be getting an 18% rate increase. Your rate is going to go up from $155 to $183. For some facilities, they got that letter. And you're like, oh gosh, this was a good letter. Or you could get a letter to say, this is the Healthcare Authority. Your rate is going to be decreased by $20 per resident per day, effective this date. And you're like, oh my gosh. By the time you get that letter, it's done, it's over, it's decided, there's no going back. 4 years ago, was it 4 or 5 years ago, we had a huge budget shortfall and there was no money. The rainy day fund didn't have the money, it was bad. So we were working and I was called into a meeting at the Healthcare Authority and they said, we need you to project some scenarios. The impact of a 5% budget cut, a 10% budget cut, and a 15% budget cut. And I was just like, oh my gosh, look what this would do. Well, they kind of stuck with 12%. And then I just said, 12% budget cut, we're going to have nursing homes that are going to close. You cut their rate 12%, because here's what happens. If they say that we're going to have to cut the budget 12%, they said, whoa, we can't cut education. It's been underfunded. So we're going to hold education harmless. So instead of a 12% cut for you, because that's half the budget, your cut's going to be 18%. You're going to have to absorb theirs. And I was like, whoa, we can't do that. So I go to them and say, hey, we have no margin in nursing homes. You can't cut us. So they're like, okay, well, we're not going to cut the Medicaid agencies. So schools, instead of getting cut 12%, you're going to get cut 18%. Education goes, whoa, we can't do that. Welcome to the legislative process and the need for advocacy. The squeaky wheel gets oiled. If we sit back and don't tell our story, then we're going to have to just accept whatever that letter says. Remember when all the teachers had their strike and they went to the Capitol? 25,000 teachers. They're like, oh my gosh, give them the money. They did. The next year they came back and I thought, they're back? We need more money. The teachers got more money the second year. And don't get me wrong, teachers went years without a raise. Nursing homes went years without a raise too. When they tried to raise wages, healthcare went up, medical supplies went up, food went up. Did we get a raise? No. But we tried to tell our story. But the sad thing is we didn't have 25,000 residents sitting out there on the lawn of the Capitol saying we have to fund long-term care, because our residents are in the nursing home. They're not able to do that. So we have to be their voice. So we go to the Capitol. Oh, I do have a good picture for you. I hope it's on. I'll see. I don't think it is. I have to show you this picture. I need to put it in here. I'm going to get through this and I'm going to show you a picture. So it's because of the budget. If we don't advocate for that budget, then they're going to pass us over. Squeaky wheel gets oiled. You know, if we're in their office every single day, in fact, one time I went in there and they're like, you know what, we got the message. We're going to do everything we can. We're not going to cut you. But because I was just unrelenting. Hi, I'm back. I want to tell you the importance of funding for long-term care. Gotcha. Go away. Because when I walk out the door, the next person comes in. I'm going to tell you about the importance of funding education. Then that person walks out, the next person walks in. You have to fund transportation. Our bridges are falling apart. So what do you do in a situation like that? So anyway, why it's important, our budget to fund your operations. New legislation to govern operations. So in Senate Bill 280, we required a staffing ratio increase. That doesn't come without a cost. So if you have this, we moved staffing from 2.41 hours of direct care per resident per day to 2.80. So if we move that up, you have to have the money to pay for it. So we have to have money to fund the legislation that will govern your operations. And why else do we need to do advocacy? We have to educate those legislators. I'm going to tell you the prime opportune time right now. There are still elections going underway. We have some races that have been settled because there wasn't an opponent of the opposite party. So in the primary election, the election was settled. Quite a few people had no opponent. No one even wanted to run. You couldn't pay me to do that job. But the rest of the elections will be decided November 3rd. So call legislators, call candidates and say, hey, what are you going to do for long-term care? I promise you, every single collateral, every piece of information that everyone running for office has says, a friend of the elderly, care about the older people, need to do more for older Oklahomans. They all say that. Nothing against them, they all say that. And the largest demographic of voters is the elderly. So if they know they're going to do something for the elderly, the 65 plus population, they're going to say, okay, I'm going to vote for you. You're going to take care of them. So we need to tell people now how important it is that we adequately fund long-term care. You realize the cost of PPE that every one of these facilities has incurred during this time. The good thing is we've been given some money. Here's some CARES Act funds from the health department. Here's some provider relief funds from the Health and Human Services. Here's the Payroll Protection Act from the White House. All these piecemeal things, so much so that legislators can't even keep track of what providers have been given. And unfortunately, some providers don't even know, can I apply for this? Does this apply to me? Can I get more money? I got this other money. And the other thing is they're throwing out a lot of money now. Their facilities have got tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I told these facilities, you know what? This other fourth round of funding has been stalled. And there may not be any more. They've gone trillions in debt over this COVID-19, trillions. So they may just say, that's what we have. So whatever money those facilities were given are what we're going to have to deal with this, which they think could be 18 to 24 months. We've got a long road ahead, so we better be vocal, about the state. One of the provisions of the most, they call it the fourth round, was that there would be some extra, this was in the the president's executive orders, that there would be money for states. We'll give you some money, but you have to match it. We'll give you 3/4 of it, you match the other 1/4. Oklahoma has no money to match. We don't have any money. Oil and gas revenue has gone down to a dismal level. So if we don't have that, our 25% matching funds, we can't collect the federal matching dollars, and we're going to say, sorry, but we can't play. We can't do that. And we'd miss those dollars. So we have to have advocacy because we have to be a resource for legislators. They have to know what the impact of this legislation is going to be. So if we don't call them, who will? The other thing I think is very important for you to do is to reach out to family members. There is so much at stake with these family members. Family members, in their own perfect world, they would love staffing to be one-on-one. You know, once you get to a facility as an administrator, you'll hear from families, well, can't someone do this for my mom? Can't someone help her? She would like to do this 4 times a week instead of 1 time a week. They have no idea the restraints that these facilities have right now, the staffing levels that are required, and forget about COVID-19. Let's go in a pre-COVID-19 environment. We had financial challenges, the cost of staffing, the cost if you tried the health insurance. Right now, by the way, I don't know if any of you are involved in a facility that has Insure Oklahoma. That program could be going away. And that is a really good subsidy for facilities to offer health insurance to your staff. I know a facility that pays outright for the health insurance for their staff, and it's almost $700 per staff member. Run the numbers. If you're doing that for anyone that works over 30 hours a week, it's not sustainable. But do legislators really know and understand that? Now, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, so you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to. But do any of you know a legislator, any legislator personally, or know anyone who's running for office? Do you know anyone? Does anyone know anyone? Paul Scott. I want you to know Paul Scott is a very active senator when it comes to long-term care issues. Paul Scott actually owns a mobile medical company. And so he's in and out of nursing homes all day, every day. He actually has an opponent in this race. His race will be just, yeah. And interesting, Jessica works at a nursing home, doesn't she?
Yeah, Greg uses his x-ray company and I'm in the middle of it. They're from the same county. It's a fun,
yeah, it's
interesting right now.
But you know what's happened with Paul Scott? Well, actually, that's a bad example because he has a mobile medical supply company. So that's how he knows the plight of long-term care. But if he didn't have that medical supply company and he was a legislator out there, who would have educated that legislator? Who would have made him that champion? I promise you, well, let me go to, her name is just gonna, I cannot think of her name. In Tulsa, her mother was at a nursing facility in Tulsa, and I worked with her, but her name is just slipped. Her mother was in a nursing home. Her dad ends up moving to the nursing home too. They both end up dying there, and she runs for the legislature. And so now, every time I have a long-term care issue, I go to her. She's such a good friend, I don't know her name. But it's a wonder I'm saying, because I'll tell you, in this COVID-19 thing, I've been doing updates, regulatory updates every single day. Every night I push out an update, and I just finally got to where now I'm doing a few a week instead of daily. This thing has been crazy. But anyway, that legislator is such a wonderful person because she has this direct connection to a family member. So every one of you, how many of you are, raise your hand again, how many of you are actually working in a nursing home now? Okay, now I don't want to put you on the spot, but at that nursing home you're working in, have they ever asked you, hey, call this number, just tell them to vote yes on this, or call this number and ask them to, don't raise your hand because I don't want to call anyone out. If they haven't, you go back and you tell them to say, you know what, we can help with advocacy. When you get that little email that says call and help us, I'll make a phone call. You know what I did in some of my member communities? There are residents like in the assisted living or the independent living sections if they have a continuum of care, and I'll get them a little talking point sheet. Call this number, ask for this person, say vote yes for this because of this. 2 sentences. That's all I have to do. Call the number, ask for someone, and say 2 sentences. And they all got together and we generated 500 calls in probably 2 days on a very important issue. And legislators were calling me saying, we know you're behind this, which was good, they thought. They said, tell those people to quit calling. They're tying up all the lines. No one can get through. I said, really? In other words, that's how important this issue is. You need to be paying attention. So it really, really worked. Advocacy is a great way to get things done. But I'm probably going to say this for the 4th time, and I have to keep saying it. We're either a part of the solution or we're a part of the problem. So we know right now, I'm telling you now, there's going to be a major budget shortfall. And when they announce in December what it's going to be, there could actually be revenue shortfall between now and then. But when they announce what it's going to be, we have to start. We have to tell our story, because we're going to be, they're going to say across the board, this is what our cut's going to be. And let me go to this next slide. I knew I had this slide. In 2017, the budget shortfall was $215 million. That's a far cry from $1 billion. And all of a sudden, they just announced, we're going to make cuts to Healthcare Authority, DHS, Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. We don't have the money. And we're going to, by the way, we're going to eliminate Adult Day. We don't have the money for that either. We're just going to eliminate those programs. And nursing homes are going to be cut 4%. And all other programs are going to be cut 9%. And we're like, you've got to be kidding. Actually, we were successful. We've only had one 3.5% cut. And I'm trying to think of what year it was. And we were successful in getting some money shifted and getting some stuff done. But it's because of advocacy. We could have all just said, wait for the letter. We know this is coming. It was in the news. But instead, we get out and try to do something. Because if we don't, I promise you, every legislator has someone, has a friend who has someone in a nursing home. You know, someone who knows someone. So at one time, there is a program that there are people that may just above the level that's allowed for Medicaid to be in a nursing home. And we've since changed that, the Millard Trust. If you make too much money, you can go into a nursing home, but then your assets will be settled and you'll have to pay back the Healthcare Authority. But it used to not be that way years ago. So if someone made more than this threshold, Medicaid wouldn't pay for their nursing home. And how many families could pay now for, $500, $600 a month for nursing home care? They couldn't. So anyway, one time when there was a budget shortfall way back in early 2000, I think, they said, you know what, we're going to cut that threshold. So you have, now it's like 160% of the federal poverty level, and they're going to bring it down to the 100% level. And we ran the numbers, and 25% of the people in nursing homes would no longer qualify for Medicaid. They didn't qualify because they made just enough. They made between the 100% and like the 160 or whatever it was at that time. So we made the list and realized 25% of the people in nursing homes would get a letter to say, effective this date, family, you pick up this person, be your family member, because they're no longer going to qualify unless you can pay that money. And I promise you, most couldn't or wouldn't pay that money. 25%. Think about your nursing home. It lose 25% of your residents. And we have 25% of the people. There's some of those people, they have no family. There is no personal representative for those individuals. So what happens to them? But the interesting thing was, when they first proposed this, they had no idea what the fallout would be. They didn't know 25% of the people would be no longer qualified for a nursing home. They didn't know. So we had to educate them. As an advocate, we all have to educate them, because if not, they'll make a decision and not understand what the fallout of that decision is. So that's why it's important that we're advocates. Now I have to find it. I just thought about this, but I have to find it and show you something. Hey, see, let me see if I have website access. Show you a picture. I know. I'll tell you the power of advocacy. Let's see if it's in here. Yes. So first of all, this is a bad picture because this picture was taken before we had cameras and iPhones and things like that. So back when they were going to make these across the board cuts that would have decimated long-term care. See these t-shirts that say solutions for the life of the state, solutions for the life of our state, meaning these, whatever we're proposing is a solution that directly impacts lives. So we went up to I ordered these t-shirts. I overnighted, I don't know, I think 800 t-shirts from Dallas with this on it. And I literally got 800 people. And we filled these t-shirts with people. And we walked all the way around the Capitol with these green t-shirts on. And people were like, who are those green people? What are they doing here? And on the front page of the Oklahoman, the next day was a picture of me. And I talk with my hands a lot. And I was pointing my finger like this at the governor, because the governor came out of her office and she wanted to know what was going on. And I said, we're trying to tell you, you have to take care of these people. You can't cut these programs that directly impact lives. So that was very successful, but not as successful as this next thing. The green t-shirts were really good, but in my advocacy work, I realized it's too hard to figure out what size everyone is because we had bigger people and smaller people, but everyone has a head. So I ordered caps for the next one. So we had ball caps. And I called my supplier in Dallas and I said, I need 1,500 hats. She said, you always do this to me, Mary. The most hats we can produce in one day is 750. I said, I know. But if you try a little harder, you can get me 1,500 hats. She said, I can't get you 1,500 hats. I said, phone a friend. You know good and well, you know somebody else who's in your business. Give them half of the order. Let them do the other half. You do it together. You both get to get a nice order and send me 1,500 hats. And you know what? I had 1,500 hats overnighted to me. So what did I do then? We put together a rally at the Capitol where they were going to cut long-term care again. And not only were they going to cut long-term care, they were going to cut Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services and DHS. So we had a good crowd of people there. And we told everyone, come to the Capitol, fill the Capitol. And you never know who's going to show up. But we put these caps on people. And let me show you what we got that day, the power of advocacy. Let me do it that way. I want you to see that picture. Oh, here's a great advocacy quote. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. I ought to put that in my presentation. Because if you ever doubted why you needed to be involved in advocacy, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Now I'm going to find my great picture. And I didn't even take this picture. I didn't even know about it for days afterwards. The Capitol is open on the second floor and the fourth floor. They call it the rotunda. We see all the green hats? We even ran out of hats. The Capitol was packed full of people. The Capitol security and the troopers, they came to me and said, someone told us you organized this. You need to get these people out of the Capitol because we've exceeded, it was the fire marshal, because we've exceeded the fire code. We had 1,500 people outside the Capitol who couldn't even get in. And some of them were like legislators and other people that needed to be in. And I said, oh, I can't leave the Capitol. Because if I leave, everybody else will leave. They'll think this is over with, so I have to stay. And they're like, what? So I stayed. And we made a big statement that day about how we have a responsibility for long-term care. One thing you always need to remember, people talk about the long-term care industry. We are not an industry. Never call it an industry. We're not the long-term care industry. I correct people all day, every day. We are the long-term care profession. We deal with people. An industry deals with inanimate objects. The automobile industry, they're dealing with parts on a conveyor belt. We are not dealing with parts on a conveyor belt. If anyone, if I could ask you to believe here two things, it would be if anyone ever says long-term care industry, you correct them. You correct them and tell them we are the long-term care profession because we deal with people. We're not an industry. And the other thing is speak out and speak up, because if we don't, we will be forgotten. We're not as big as education. We're not as big as roads, bridges, transportation, but think of the lives involved. And remember my other quote from the first session, who are we as a society if we turn our backs on the frailest, most vulnerable, the least among us, the ones we need? So advocacy is so important, because if we don't do it, who will? If not us, then who? Who would do it? So anyway, hopefully I need to add this into this presentation, because last time I pulled it up too, I thought about it, and I thought, you know, I did this presentation at a national conference, and it was about advocacy, and they talked about, oh, well, we'll fly into Washington, D.C. and get 2 or 3 people to meet with them. I was just like, 2 or 3 people? And I showed them the slide. I said, this is what we do. But in the same sentence, here's what I'm going to tell you. In the same breath, it starts with one person. We don't have to have this. We can end up with this. But it starts with every person taking ownership of it. Every person, every single one voice. It starts with one voice. The one drop of water that makes the ripple, that makes the wave. So this was our wave that we ended up making. But the only way we got to that point is, it wasn't like overnight. I overnighted the hats in, but I wasn't going to get that many people there overnight. These are people that we brought into the process all along through advocacy. We called them, we told them, look what's going to happen. If you're on Advantage Waiver Services and they cut those programs, you'll have to go to a nursing home. You won't have a choice. Then we say you're going to go to the nursing home, but some of those could close. You know, we can't afford the nursing homes. We're going to completely cut adult day. How crazy is that? Actually, I passed a bill about, let me think how long, 4 years ago. After this happened, I said, you know, where's the plan? Where is the plan? There was no plan for aging in Oklahoma. So I passed a bill that said we have to put together an advisory committee that's going to develop a long-range plan for long-term care in Oklahoma. And these legislators, it sounds good on paper. It looks like we care for the elderly. We're going to do it. And it got passed, no problem. I said, no, we are going to do this. And we brought in, and in the bill, it outlined who was going to be involved in this. Senior advocates, state agencies, legislators, everyone. We brought them all in, and we did that. We spent 2 years, a year doing the groundwork, and then a year with committee meetings, meeting monthly, then meeting twice a week, then meeting weekly, and we developed the long-term care services and supports plan for aging in Oklahoma. It is on the, I ought to put that in here too, it's on the Leading Age Oklahoma website, and we have printed it and we've given it to every single legislator and said, look at the number of people, 65 plus, this growing population that's going to double in the next 11 years. In the next 11 years, it's going to double. It's going to double. So who's going to take care of all these people? Where's the money? How are we going to fund this? And this plan outlines that. It gives ideas, options. And so we'll see what happens. We presented it to the governor. We presented it to the Speaker of the House, Senate Pro Tem. Every legislator got a copy of it. And since we've circled back to some of these key people that I will not mention and mentioned it, they said, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, let me get you another copy. So I passed out lots of those copies of that plan. But that's what advocacy is about, is we have to use our voice to advance a plan to enable to have an adequate, sustainable framework for Oklahoma's long-term care system for the years and decades to come. Because, you know, it can slip really fast, and we can't let that happen. There's too much at stake.